Hi friends, welcome to our channel The Dental Educators. In the previous lecture for the tooth numbering system, we discussed about the basic introduction regarding the tooth numbering systems which are being used, and we discussed in particular for the first type of tooth numbering system which was reported, that was the permutation system. In today's lecture, we will be discussing about the second type of tooth numbering system, that is referred as the universal notation system. So what is the universal notation system and how do we count the teeth for the primary and deciduous dentition, we will see in the following slides. The universal notation system for the deciduous dentition, we use the uppercase letter for each of the primary tooth. Now what does the word universe means? Universe means that we are counting all of the teeth in one go. We are not dividing them into separate regions or separate parts. So in the case of universal numbering system, for both for primary dentition and for the permanent dentition, we count all of the teeth in one go. We don't divide them in the separate parts or separate quadrants as we did in the permanent notation system. In the case of the primary dentition, for universal numbering system, we are still using the alphabets as we use for the Palmer notation system. But in that case, we used only 5 alphabets, the first 5 alphabets for the Palmer notation system. But in the case of universal notation system, we will be counting the teeth from A to T. So for the maxillary arch, as we have 10 teeth, we start to count the teeth from the right second molar, and then we continue till the second molar of the left hand side. So that makes up first 10 alphabets from A to J. Then we continue from left hand side to the right hand side, that is from the left second molar to the second molar on the right hand side. So again we count rest of the 10 alphabets starting from K to T. So that makes up total 20 alphabets, which are corresponding to 20 deciduous teeth in the primary dentition. So let's go with the formulas. How do we calculate all of the teeth? So for the calculation of primary teeth in the deciduous dentition, so we start to count from the primary deciduous second molar and we mark it as A on the right hand side. So the first tooth which we count in the primary dentition as per universal numbering system is the second molar on the right hand side, and we mark it as label A, whereas the second tooth which is counted to, that will be the first molar and will be labeled as B. The canine is labeled as C in the right quadrant, then D for the lateral incisor, and finally E for the central incisor. If we see the movement of counting of teeth, we can see that we are moving from the second molar towards the midline, that is toward the central incisor. Now after counting the first 5 teeth of the right quadrant, we move towards the left quadrant, and then we continue to count from the midline towards the distal direction, that is, now we will count the central incisor and label it as F, then the lateral as G, then the canine as H of the left hand side, and for the left second molar as I, and the second molar as J. So we can see here we counted the maxillary arch from the alphabet A to J, starting from the second molar of the right hand side to the second molar of the left hand side. Now after counting the teeth in the maxillary arch, we go towards the mandibular arch and we will start to count from the lower left hand side second molar. So the second molar of the lower left hand side, continuing from J in the same alphabetical order, we label it as K, and then going towards the midline, we label all of the teeth accordingly. That is, for the first molar we label it as L, for the canine, we label it as M. For the lateral incisor of the left quadrant, we label it as N. And finally, the central incisor of the mandibular left quadrant, we label it as O. Now we will continue to count the teeth on the right hand side in the same alphabetical order. So the next tooth after the central incisor of the left mandibular quadrant is the P. That is the mandibular central incisor of the right quadrant. So we label it as P. Then the tooth adjacent to the central incisor is the lateral incisor. We label it as Q. Then the tooth adjacent to the lateral is the canine, which we label it as R in the right mandibular quadrant. Then the second last tooth is the first molar, which we label it as S. And finally, the last tooth of the right mandibular quadrant is labeled as T. So we can see here we counted the mandibular teeth from the left second molar, that is from K to the alphabet T on the right hand side second molar. So basically we just use the alphabetical order starting from A to T in the case of the deciduous dentition. Now let's go through the diagrammatic representation. So as we discussed earlier, as a quick review, we will see that we count all of the teeth in one go. So we can see here we started to count the teeth from the right second molar, and then we went towards the midline using the alphabetical order, that is the right second molar labeled as A, first molar as B, canine on the right hand side of the maxillary arch as C, the lateral incisor as D, the central incisor as E. Now when we shift towards the left hand side, we label the central incisor in the sequence of alphabetical order, and we label it as F, the lateral incisor as G, the canine as H, the first molar as I, and the second molar as J. So we counted all of the maxillary teeth from A to J. Now we shift towards the mandibular arch in a clockwise direction, and we can see we started to count the teeth from the left second molar and labeled it as K, the first molar on the left hand side as L, M for the canine, N for the lateral incisor, and O for the central incisor of the left hand side. Now we continue to count in the alphabetical order towards the right hand side and label central incisor of the right hand side as P, Q for the lateral incisor, R for the canine, S for the first molar on the right hand side, and T for the second molar on the right hand side. So we can see that we counted all of the mandibular teeth starting from the left second molar, and we went through all of the teeth to the second molar on the right hand side till T. So we counted all of the mandibular teeth from alphabet K to T, and we will label them accordingly. Now let's go through the diagrammatic or video representation in a quick view. So you can see here in the universal numbering system we counted all of the teeth in a clockwise manner. So we labeled the second molar on the right hand side as label A, then the first molar as B, canine on the right hand side that's C, first central lateral incisor as D, central as E, central on left hand side as F, lateral on left hand side as G, then the deciduous canine on left hand side as H, the first molar as I, and then the second molar on the left hand side as J. Now we go downwards and started to count with the second molar on the left hand side and label it as K, first for L, M for canine, N for the lateral, and O for the central incisor of left hand side. So we label P for the central incisor of the right hand side, then Q for the lateral incisor of right hand side, followed by R for the canine of the right hand side, S for the first molar of the right hand side, and last tooth is the second molar, which we label as T. Thus, it is the deciduous second molar on the right hand side. Now we can see clearly in the diagrammatic representation that what we did, we made up the quadrants. If we make up the quadrants from A to E is labeled for the right maxillary quadrant, from F to J we mention it for the left maxillary quadrant. Then from K to O we mark the teeth for the left mandibular quadrant. It is followed by P to T for the right mandibular quadrant. Now when we talk about the permanent dentition, in the permanent dentition as per universal numbering system, the maxillary teeth are numbered from 1 to 16, beginning from the third molar on the right hand side, and we continue to count the maxillary teeth from the third molar on the right hand side to the third molar on the left hand side. So basically we have 32 teeth in the permanent dentition. So 16 teeth are in the maxillary arch and 16 teeth are in the mandibular arch. So for the maxillary arch we count teeth from 1 to 16, whereas for the mandibular arch, in the same way as we did in the deciduous dentition, we start to count the teeth from the third molar on the left hand side and we continue to count towards the right hand side. So as we have 16 teeth in the mandibular arch as well, so we count the teeth from 17 to 32 to make up all the 32 teeth, or to count all of the 32 teeth in the oral cavity. So how do we count it? We can see in this illustration that we started to count the maxillary teeth from the third molar on the right hand side. So the third molar on the right quadrant is labeled as number 1. The second permanent molar is labeled as 2. The first molar is labeled as 3. The second premolar on the right hand side is labeled as 4. The first premolar on the right hand side is labeled as 5. The canine is labeled as 6, and the lateral incisor on the right hand side is labeled as 7, whereas the central is labeled as 8. Now from the right hand side we continue to count the teeth towards the left hand side quadrant. So the central incisor of the left hand side is now labeled as number 9. The lateral is labeled as number 10. The canine is labeled as 11. The first premolar is 12. The second premolar is 13. The first molar as 14. The second permanent molar as 15. And last, the third molar, you can say, as 16. So we counted all of the teeth in the permanent dentition in the maxillary arch from 1 to 16, because in the maxillary arch you have 16 teeth. So now again you will count the 16 teeth in the mandibular arch, so that we can make up 16 plus 16, that is equals to 32. So we start to count from the third molar of the left quadrant. So we mark the third molar as 17, the second permanent molar in the left quadrant as 18, the first permanent molar is 19, second premolar is 20, first premolar 21, 22 for the canine, 23 for the lateral incisor, and 24 for the central incisor in the left quadrant. Now we continue to count the teeth towards the right quadrant. So we label the central incisor of the right quadrant as 25, the lateral as 26, the canine as 27, the first premolar 28, second premolar 29, first molar is 30, second molar is 31, and last the third molar is 32. So if we see one important thing, that we counted all of the teeth in going in a clockwise direction, that is starting from the upper right third molar, and we went through the left maxillary quadrant, left mandibular quadrant and ending up in the right mandibular quadrant. So basically, we went in a clockwise direction to count all of the teeth. Now, the thing which comes in our mind, why are we using the numbers in the permanent dentition, not the alphabets? The reason behind not using the alphabet is that in the alphabet, as per the alphabetical order, we don't have 32 alphabets. So we use numbers to identify or to mark each of the permanent tooth. But we do have 20 enough alphabets for the deciduous dentition. So we mark the deciduous teeth with the alphabets rather than using the numbers. Now going in the diagrammatic representation for the permanent dentition, we can see a nice illustration in which we see that all of the teeth are given as particular numbers. So starting for the from the right hand side, the third molar on the right hand side of the maxillary arch is marked as number 1, second as 2, first as 3, second premolar as 4, first premolar as 5, the canine as 6, the lateral incisor of the right hand side as 7, the central incisor as 8. Now when we go towards the central incisor of the left hand side, we mark it as number 9, number 10 for the lateral, number 11 for the canine, number 12 for the first premolar, number 13 for the second premolar, number 14 for the first molar on the left hand side, number 15 for the second permanent molar on the left hand side, 16 for the third permanent molar or third molar on the left hand side. Now we go in a clockwise direction and we start to count the teeth in the left hand side area, and we mark the third molar on the left hand side as number 17, first molar as 18, second molar as 18, first molar as 19, second premolar is 20, first premolar is 21, canine is 22, 23 for the lateral incisor and 24 for the central incisor of the left hand side. Now going on to the central incisor of the right hand side, we mark it as 25, 26 for the lateral, 27 for the canine, 28 for the first premolar, 29 for the second premolar, 30 for the first molar, 31 for the second permanent molar, and last the third molar is marked as 32. So we can see here for the maxillary right quadrant we mark the teeth from 1 to 8, whereas for the maxillary left quadrant we mark the teeth from 9 to 16. That makes up total 16 teeth in the maxillary arch. And then we started to count the mandibular left quadrant teeth, that is from 17 to 24, and then we continued for the mandibular right quadrant from 25 to 32. Now let's go through the video illustration and quickly wrap up the new. Now let's go through the video animation and we will see how do we count the teeth in the patient model or in the patient directly. So starting from the third molar on the right hand side, which we mark as number 1, then we start to continue towards midlines, marking second molar as number 2 of the upper right hand side, this first molar as number 3, the second premolar as 4, the first premolar as number 5, the canine as number 6, the lateral incisor as 7, and central incisor of the upper right hand side at tooth number 8. Now we continue to count towards the left hand side and we mark the central incisor of left hand side as tooth number 9, 10 for the lateral incisor. Then we count the canine as number 11, the first premolar as 12, the second premolar is tooth number 13, the first permanent molar after the second premolar will be marked as tooth number 14, and that after the first permanent molar of the upper left hand side we mark the second permanent molar as tooth number 15 and the third molar on the left hand side as 16. So we counted all the teeth from tooth number 1 to 16 in the maxillary arch. Now after counting them we go towards the mandibular arch just below And on the left hand side we mark the third molar as tooth number 17. After the third molar on the left hand side, we start to count the teeth towards the midline and mark the second molar as 18, first molar as 19, second premolar as 20. The first premolar is marked as 21 of the left hand side. Then we mark the canine as 22, the lateral as 23, and the central incisor of the left hand side as tooth number 24. Then we count towards the right hand side the central incisor and mark it as 25, 26 for the lateral, 27 for the canine, 28 for the first premolar, 29 for the second, 30 for the first molar on the right hand side, 31 for the second molar on the right hand side, and last tooth is the 32, that is the third molar on the right hand side. So that's all with the universal notation system. So now we are left with the third type of tooth numbering system, that is the FDI notation system. So we will be discussing that in the upcoming lecture. So stay tuned with the dental educators to be updated and posted for the recent lectures. If you have any queries, you write it down in the comment box below. They will be shortly answered.